Story 1. War Whoopin' Scalping Knife. I never knew how quickly a quiet Pennsylvania night could turn into something I would spend the rest of my life trying to forget. The first sign that something was wrong came the moment I heard the sound drifting across the dark valley. It reminded me of a scream, but not from anything human. It cut through the cold November air with a sharp rise, as if something was calling out from the ridgeline above the town. I had no idea what it meant then, but now, looking back, I should have turned my truck around and driven until the whole valley was just a memory behind me. I had taken a job repairing cell towers across rural Pennsylvania, the kind of work that kept me on long stretches of highway at odd hours. That night, the sky was moonless, and the small town I was assigned to felt more isolated than any place I had been before. The forest pressed right up against the cracked roads, and the houses were spread far apart, their windows dark like blind eyes. The town had a name, but I swear no one ever said it out loud. People just called it the Valley, like it was someplace outside regular geography. My rental cabin sat near the base of a ridge known for old stories, though I had not heard any of them before I arrived. Locals avoided talking about the hills, the ravines, and the strange patterns of sound that carried through them. Every neighbor I met kept their eyes focused somewhere past my shoulder, as if something behind me was worth watching more than conversation. I figured it was poverty, stress, or just the usual suspiciousness of small towns when an outsider shows up alone. But the first night, as soon as the wind died, I heard it again. A long, rolling cry, like a combination of rage and grief, echoing across the valley. It did not sound like an animal. It rose and fell in a rhythm that felt deliberate, like a call meant for someone or something. The timber walls of the cabin vibrated with the sound. My skin tightened. I stood still in the middle of the room, every nervous instinct telling me to leave. In the morning, I asked the convenience store clerk if the hills were home to coyotes. He stared at the counter and pretended he did not hear me. The silence told me everything. People there did not talk about the sound, and they definitely did not talk about the history of raids, skirmishes, and missing settlers that had once taken place in that valley. I would learn all of this later, after it was too late to help me. On the second night, I started noticing things around the cabin. The dirt paths showed fresh footprints that circled the building. I felt watched, even when I was inside with the curtains closed. The trees stood too still, as if they were listening. Then the cry returned, this time closer, lower, resonating through my bones. I could not tell whether it came from the ridge or from somewhere much nearer. Sleep never came. My brain kept replaying the sound. I told myself it had to be an animal, even when I knew no animal made a cry that felt like a warning meant for one specific person. The third day, I hiked up the ridge to check on a tower that had been sending bad signals. The trail was narrow, overgrown, and filled with old stones that looked like the remains of fortifications or markers. The air grew colder the higher I climbed. I reached a point where the forest opened up and the valley spread out below me. The town looked tiny from up there, swallowed by the trees. That was when I noticed the ground beneath my boots. Someone had carved shallow lines into the dirt, forming a circular pattern. Inside the circle, the soil was darker, almost burned. On the old timber post near the pattern hung a rusted blade. It had a short handle wrapped in cracked leather and a curved metal edge that looked like it had been buried for a century. A war tool, a scalping knife, the kind used in the stories about old battles between settlers and native tribes. I reached toward it, but the moment my fingers hovered above the leather, the cry erupted again. This time it was so close that I stumbled backward. It felt like the entire ridge shouted at once. I grabbed my pack and ran back down the mountain, never looking behind me. That night, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The usual crickets and distant highway sounds had vanished. I sat in the cabin, the lamp flickering, the shadows moving like water. I kept replaying that strange symbol carved into the dirt, the burned circle. The old knife, I told myself it was just history. Artifacts, evidence of a violent past that still lingered in the ground. But the sound that followed me down the ridge did not belong to any ghost story I knew. It felt alive. It felt aware. My fear grew heavier when I realized the story did not end with old battles. Some of the locals had ancestors who claimed that certain valleys were places where war cries never died, where the land kept repeating the violence it witnessed, where the spirits of those who fell never found rest. My hands shook as I tried to convince myself that none of this mattered, that I was only there for a week, that I would leave soon. But the valley had already marked me. The fourth night, something scraped against the cabin walls. Slow, deliberate strokes, like a blade dragged across wood. I held my breath and pressed my back against the farthest wall. The scraping moved from one corner to the next, always slow, as if the thing outside wanted me to hear every inch it traced. I did not dare step to the window. I could feel something waiting on the other side of the glass. The scraping stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then there came a single thud, like something heavy striking the front door. The cabin shook. The air inside turned icy. I could hear breathing, or at least something that resembled breathing. Deep, rattling, full of anger. The war cry came next, almost point blank. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I felt my knees buckle. The sound was not coming from outside. It vibrated inside my skull, as if the valley was speaking directly into my mind. I crawled to the back room and hid under the bed, gripping the floorboards to stop my hands from shaking. I stayed there until dawn, when sunlight finally crept through the thin curtains. I forced myself to check the cabin. Nothing had broken in, but the front door showed 4 long marks, each carved deep, each ending in a sharp point. On the porch lay clumps of dirt arranged in a circle, the same burned-looking pattern I had seen on the ridge. And in the middle of the circle lay the scalping knife. That knife had been hanging on the ridge miles away. Something had carried it to my cabin. Something wanted me to see it, to hold it, to take part in whatever had begun. I wrapped the blade in a towel and locked it in the truck. I needed to get out of the valley, even if it meant abandoning the job and paying for the rental myself. But the valley did not want to let me go. As I drove along the narrow road, the forest pressed closer, branches scraping the sides of the truck. The engine sputtered, the radio cut to static, and through the static came the cry. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. My chest tightened. I pressed the gas harder. The road curved along a ravine. And that was when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, tall, still, the outline almost human but wrong in the way its limbs hung. I slammed the brakes and skidded sideways, barely stopping before hitting it. When the truck finally halted, the figure was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The static on the radio shifted. It became a low hum. The hum grew into a pulse, matching my heartbeat. The war cry followed, far louder than before. The ground seemed to shake beneath the tires. I threw the truck into reverse and turned around, driving back toward town. I did not know what else to do. The road behind me was no longer safe. The ridge above me felt alive. The valley had turned into a trap. Back in town, the streets were empty. Not a single person walked outside. Curtains were drawn. Doors were locked. It felt like the whole town knew what was happening and wanted no part of it. As I drove through the center, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Dirt patterns, burned circles, one on every yard. I stopped at the only place with lights on, the old fire station. The garage door stood open, and the concrete floor was covered in ash. In the center of the floor lay dozens of objects arranged in a ring. Old tools, bones, pieces of broken pottery, arrowheads, and right in the middle, another scalping knife. Shiny, clean, as if it had just been used. The cry echoed again. This time it did not come from outside. It came from inside the fire station. The temperature dropped. The lights flickered. Shapes formed in the corner. Shadows moving with purpose, not with the light. I backed away, but the shadows stretched toward me. The air pressed tight against my ribs. I ran back to the truck and tore down the road, desperate to reach the highway. As I approached the edge of the valley, the noise built to a deafening pitch. Cry after cry, overlapping, like a chorus of agony. The forest shook. The sky darkened. It felt like the land itself was rising against me. When I finally burst out onto the open highway, everything went silent. Completely silent. I drove for hours before I pulled over. The knife in the back seat rattled against the metal frame, even though the road was smooth. 3 days later, when I returned the truck, the knife was gone. No one saw me take it out. No one saw me leave it. It simply disappeared. That was the part that convinced me the valley had not finished with me. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night to that same scream echoing deep inside my head. Sometimes I find dirt on my windowsill in the shape of a circle. Sometimes I hear something scraping along my house, slow and deliberate. And every time, I wonder if the valley is calling me back. Before you click away, I want to ask you something. If you heard a war cry in the middle of the woods, and you knew it was not human, would you follow it or run? Tell me your answer in the comments. Story 2. Hollow that doesn't. You forget. I should have never stopped in that town. But when your fuel gauge hits empty on a back road in southern Pennsylvania at 2 in the morning, you done. Do you have much choice? The gas station sat alone at a crossroads, its fluorescent lights flickering like dying fireflies. No other buildings in sight, just dark fields stretching endlessly in every direction. The attendant, an old man with clouded eyes, didn't look up when I walked in. He just muttered something under his breath and pointed toward the bathroom key hanging on a rusted nail. "You're not from around here," he said as I paid. "It wasn't a question. Just passing through," I replied. He studied my face for too long. "Don, to stop anywhere else tonight? Don, to pull over? Don, to look for shortcuts?" His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And if you see a house with a crooked chimney standing alone in a hollow, keep driving. Don, to even look at it." I nodded, thinking he was just another eccentric local trying to spook the outsider. I've driven across this country 100 times for work. You meet all kinds, but something about the way his hands trembled when he handed me the receipt made my stomach tighten. 20 minutes later, my GPS went dead. The screen just went black, like someone had reached inside and switched it off. My phone showed no signal. Not even one bar. I was somewhere between York and the Maryland border, on roads that barely qualified as roads. More like suggestions carved through the woods. This is when I saw the sign. Hand-painted, weathered, Hex Hollow Road. I should have turned around right there. But the road seemed to loop back toward the highway, and I was tired of being lost. The pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming a tunnel that swallowed my headlights. The darkness here felt different. Thicker, like it had weight. The house appeared suddenly. One moment there was nothing but trees, and the next, it stood there in a small clearing. 2 stories, stone foundation, and yes, a chimney that leaned at an impossible angle, like something had tried to twist it off. I stopped the car. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else pulled me to that place. The engine idled rough, and I could see my breath fogging the windshield despite the heater running full blast. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last minute. Every window in that house was dark except one. The second floor, a faint orange glow, like candlelight, pulsed behind glass so dirty it looked black. The front door stood open. Not broken open, just open, waiting. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt alive. No wind, no crickets, no distant highway sounds. Just that pressing, suffocating quiet that makes your ears ring. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an abandoned house. Probably teenagers inside, using it as a hangout spot. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled my flashlight from the glove box. The air outside hit me like a wall of ice. My flashlight beam seemed weak, barely cutting through the darkness. As I walked toward the house, I noticed the ground. Scorch marks covered the earth in strange patterns, swirling around the foundation. The stones themselves were blackened, like someone had tried to burn the entire structure down but failed. The front door creaked wider as I approached, though I hadn't touched it yet. Inside, the smell hit me first. Old smoke, decay, something else I couldn't identify, something that made my stomach turn. The floorboards were covered in symbols, carved deep into the wood, circles within circles, strange letters I didn't recognize. Hex signs, maybe. I'd seen them on barns across Pennsylvania. Good luck charms, protection, but these felt different, wrong. I moved deeper into the house. My flashlight caught something on the walls. More symbols, and beneath them, burned into the plaster, were handprints. Dozens of them, all different sizes, all blackened and smoking, like they'd been pressed there moments ago instead of decades. I reached out to touch one. The wall was hot, impossibly hot. That's when I heard the footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, moving across the second floor. The floorboards groaned under weight that shouldn't exist in an empty house. I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to run back to my car and never look back. But something kept me frozen in place. A need to understand, to see what was up there in that room with the orange glow. The staircase looked ready to collapse. Each step I took produced a groan that echoed through the house like a warning. The handrail was covered in something dark and sticky. I didn't want to know what. The second floor hallway stretched longer than it should have. The house hadn't to look this big from outside, But here I was, walking down a corridor that seemed to go on forever. The door at the end stood slightly open. Orange light spilled out, casting long shadows that moved without anything to make them. I pushed the door wider. It swung silently, revealing a room that defied everything I knew about abandoned buildings. Candles, hundreds of them, all lit, all burning with that strange orange flame. They covered every surface, the floor, the windowsills, floating in midair. That is when I understood. They weren't floating. They were balanced on something invisible, something I couldn't see but could feel watching me. In the center of the room stood a table, and on that table lay a book, massive, leather-bound. The pages looked like skin. It was open, and the text inside seemed to writhe and shift, as though the words themselves were alive. Next to it sat a knife. The blade was clean despite the rust covering everything else in this house. Too clean, recently used. I approached the table, the book, its pages flipped on their own, stopping on an entry dated 1928. The handwriting was frantic, desperate. It described a man named Nelson Remeyer, a powwow doctor, a hexmaster, someone who could cure illness, lift curses, and see into the future. But also someone who could cause those same afflictions, place those same curses. The entry described 3 men who came to this house, desperate men, convinced that Remeyer had hexed them with poverty and misfortune. They believed the only way to break his curse was to cut a lock of his hair and bury it 6 feet under. But when Remeyer refused, they killed him, beat him to death, then tried to burn this house down to hide their crime. But the fire wouldn't take. No matter how much they tried, the flames wouldn't consume the structure. They burn and burn, but the house remained, scorched but standing, like something protected it, or something inside refused to let it die. I flipped the page. The next entry was dated just last week. The handwriting was different, modern. It described a driver who got lost, who stopped at this house, who never left. Then another entry, and another, dozens of them, all recent, all describing people like me who found their way to this hollow and couldn't escape. The last entry was blank except for today, this date, and below it, my name, written in that same frantic handwriting. But I hadn't told anyone my name. No one knew I was here. The ink looked wet, fresh, like someone had just written it seconds before I walked in. That's when I felt the presence behind me. Cold radiated from it like waves of frozen air. I turned slowly, knowing I didn't want to see what stood there. But I had no choice. My body moved on its own. The man was tall, gaunt. His clothes were from another era. His face was wrong, not disfigured, just wrong in a way my mind couldn't process, like looking at an image that doesn't quite line up with reality. His eyes were clear, sharp, filled with an intelligence that transcended death. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I understood everything in that moment. Nelson Remeyer had become something else. The murder, the curse, the failed burning, it had all transformed him into something that couldn't die. Something that protected this place. Something that collected those who disturbed it. The candles flickered. The air grew colder. I stumbled backward, knocking over candles that should have set everything ablaze. But the flames died the instant they touched the floor. Nothing would burn here. Nothing could destroy what existed in this space between life and death. I ran, down the hallway that now stretched even longer, down the stairs that crumbled under my feet, through the front room where those handprints on the walls began to move, reaching toward me. Out the door, across the scorched earth, to my car. The engine started on the first try. I tore out of there, kicking up dirt and rocks. My headlights caught him standing in the doorway, just watching, waiting, knowing. I drove until sunrise, until I hit the highway, until I was surrounded by traffic and gas stations and rest stops filled with normal people living normal lives. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake what happened in that hollow. Because last night, I looked at my GPS, and somehow, impossibly, it shows a saved location, a place I never marked, Hex Hollow Road, and beneath it, in that same frantic handwriting, a message, come back. We're not finished. My phone rings sometimes in the middle of the night, unknown numbers. When I answer, all I hear is silence, that same oppressive, suffocating silence that filled that house. And in the background, so faint I might be imagining it, the sound of footsteps, moving across a floor that shouldn't exist. Vic tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep and too much coffee. But then I find things. Burn marks on my floor, symbols carved into the door frame, my name written over and over in my notebook, in handwriting that I send to mine. He is not just in that house anymore. He followed me home. Or maybe I brought something back with me. Some piece of that cursed place that let go. The curse those 3 men tried to break 100 years ago, ISN, T finished. It's still working. Still collecting. Still growing stronger with each person who stops at that house. And the terrifying truth is this: I want to go back. Some part of me, some dark piece that I didn't know existed, feels pulled to that hollow. Like there is unfinished business. Like I belong there with all the others who never left. They say curses can to be real. They say there is always a rational explanation. But I was there. I saw what exists in that place between the living and the dead. And I know the truth. Some places are marked by violence so profound that they never heal. They just wait. They collect. They grow. Hex Hollow is still there. The house still stands. The candles still burn. And Nelson Remeyer still watches from that upstairs window, waiting for the next lost soul to pull off the road and walk through his door. I can feel it calling to me right now. Even as I tell you this. Even as I warn you to never go looking for that place. Because if you do, you'll find it. And once you find it, you'll never truly leave. So here is my question for you. If you were driving through Pennsylvania late at night and saw that house with the crooked chimney standing alone in a hollow, would you be able to keep driving? Or would curiosity pull you in, just like it pulled me? Let me know in the comments what you would do, because I need to know if I'm the only one who can resist the call of that cursed place. Story 3. Witness at Hex Hollow. I should have turned back the moment I saw the crows. There were hundreds of them, perched along the fence posts that lined the narrow dirt road cutting through the Pennsylvania countryside. Not moving, not making a sound, just watching as my truck rolled past, their black eyes tracking me like security cameras. It was October, and the afternoon sun hung low and weak behind a veil of gray clouds that seemed to press down on the fields around me. I had driven 3 hours from Philadelphia to find Hex Hollow, a place I had only read about in obscure forums dedicated to American folklore and true crime. The story had grabbed me in a way I could not explain. A farmer named Nelson Remeyer, murdered in 1928 by 3 men who believed he had cursed them with powwow magic. They beat him, strangled him, and tried to burn his body in his own home. The case became a national sensation, but what fascinated me was not the murder itself. It was what came after. The road curved through bare trees that leaned inward like skeletal fingers trying to touch. My GPS had stopped working 15 minutes ago, but I kept driving, following hand-drawn directions I had found on a paranormal investigation blog. The author claimed he had visited Remeyer's property and experienced what he called an oppressive presence that follows you home. I am a skeptic by nature. I teach history at a community college, and I have spent my career explaining away myths and legends with facts and context. But something about this place had pulled me in. Maybe it was the isolation I was feeling after my divorce. Maybe it was the need to believe in something beyond the ordinary disappointments of middle age. Whatever it was, I could not stop myself from coming here. The house appeared suddenly, set back from the road behind a tangle of overgrown weeds and rusted farm equipment. It was smaller than I expected, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and windows that looked like empty eye sockets. The front door hung slightly open, swaying in the breeze. I parked my truck and stepped out into the cold air. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the wind moving through the dead grass and the distant creak of the door. I took my phone out to record some video, but the screen was black. The battery had been at 70% when I left the main highway. Now I was completely dead. I felt the first tremor of unease move through my chest, but I pushed it down. Dead batteries happen. Poor cell reception happens. I was here for a reason, and I was not going to let superstition turn me around. I walked toward the house, my boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Not gradually, but in distinct zones, as if I was passing through invisible curtains of freezing temperature. By the time I reached the front steps, I could see my breath forming thick clouds in front of my face. I hesitated at the threshold, looking into the darkness beyond the open door. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, but curiosity is a powerful drug. I stepped inside. The interior smelled like rot and ash, even though the fire that killed Remeyer had been put out almost a century ago. The floorboards groaned under my weight. and I could see holes in the ceiling where rain had collapsed sections of the upper floor. Furniture sat covered in dust and cobwebs, arranged as if someone might return at any moment. A table, 2 chairs, an old iron stove in the corner. I moved through the front room slowly, listening to the house settle around me. That was when I heard the first sound that did not belong. A low, rhythmic tapping, coming from somewhere above me. Not random, not the wind, deliberate, like someone drumming their fingers on wood. I froze, staring at the ceiling. The tapping continued for 5 seconds, then stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noise, structures shift, animals nest in walls. But my hands were shaking as I moved toward the staircase at the back of the room. The steps were steep and narrow, and several of them had rotted through completely. I tested each one before putting my full weight down, climbing slowly into the darkness of the second floor. The temperature dropped again as I ascended. By the time I reached the top, my teeth were chattering, and I could barely feel my fingers. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. 3 on the left, 2 on the right. The tapping started again, louder now, coming from the room at the far end of the hall. I walked toward it, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see a slice of the room beyond. A bed, a dresser, a window with shattered glass. The tapping stopped the moment I touched the door. I pushed it open slowly, and the hinges screamed in protest. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no debris, just bare walls and a floor covered in a thick layer of dust. And in the center of that dust, illuminated by the weak light coming through the broken window, were footprints. Fresh footprints, not mine. Someone with bare feet had walked in a circle around the room, and the prints were still sharp and clear, as if they had been made seconds ago. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I was alone in this house. I had seen no cars on the road, no signs of recent entry, but someone had been in that room. Someone was still here. I turned to run back down the stairs, and that was when I saw him, standing at the end of the hallway. A figure in shadow, too tall and too still to be natural. I could not make out a face, but I could feel eyes on me, burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, and then he took a step forward. The floorboards did not creak. He made no sound at all. He simply moved, gliding toward me with a speed that defied logic. I did not remember running down the stairs. I did not remember stumbling through the front room or bursting out the door into the fading daylight. All I knew was that I was back in my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gas pedal, tearing down the dirt road without looking back. The crows were gone. The fence posts were empty. I drove until I hit the main highway, and only then did I allow myself to breathe. My phone buzzed to life in my pocket, suddenly charged, as if nothing had been wrong at all. I pulled over and sat there for a long time, staring at the woods in my rearview mirror. That night, back in my apartment, I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination. Stress, fatigue, the power of suggestion in a place steeped in dark history. But I could not shake the memory of those footprints. The figure in the hallway, the unnatural cold. I opened my laptop and started searching for answers, falling down rabbit holes of local history and paranormal accounts. What I found made my blood run cold. Dozens of reports, people who had visited Hex Hollow and experienced the same things I had. Cold spots that moved through rooms, shadows that followed them home, and something else, something worse. Multiple witnesses claimed that after their visit, they began to see the figure in other places. Standing at the end of their driveway, outside their bedroom window, always watching, always waiting. I laughed it off at first. Mass hysteria, copycat stories. But that first night, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of tapping. Slow and deliberate, coming from my living room. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, listening as the sound moved through my apartment. It stopped outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, staring at the gap beneath the door. And that was when I saw it. A shadow, blocking the light from the hallway. Not moving, just standing there. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, silently. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. The door opened inch by inch, revealing the darkness beyond. And then it stopped. The shadow was gone. The tapping ceased. But I knew with absolute certainty that I was not alone. For 3 weeks, it continued. Every night, The same ritual. The tapping, the shadow, the sense of being watched. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My colleagues noticed the change. But what could I tell them? That I had disturbed something in an old house in the middle of nowhere? That it had followed me home? I went back to Hex Hollow twice, hoping to find some explanation, some way to undo what I had done. Both times, the house was empty. No footprints, no figures, nothing but the oppressive silence and the cold. On my third visit, I found something I had missed before. Carved into the wood of the staircase, so faint I almost did not see it. Words in German, the language of the Pennsylvania Dutch. I copied them down and had them translated. They were a warning, a boundary marker left by Remeyer himself. Do not follow the dead, for they will take you with them. I understood then what I had done. By entering that room, by witnessing the footprints, I had crossed a threshold I could not uncross. I had become a witness to something that did not want to be seen. And now it was making itself known to me. The folklore of the region is filled with stories like this. Spirits that attach themselves to the living. Curses that pass from person to person like a disease. I had thought myself immune because I did not believe. But belief has nothing to do with it. Some things exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I am telling you this now because I need you to understand. If you ever find yourself drawn to a place like Hex Hollow, a location where violence and death have left their mark, turn back. Do not let curiosity pull you across the threshold. Do not become a witness, because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you are marked, you cannot be unmarked. I still hear the tapping every night. I still see the shadows standing at the edges of my vision, waiting for something I do not understand. I have tried everything, blessings, cleansings, moving to a new apartment. Nothing works. It follows me because I let it in. I opened the door, and now I cannot close it. The worst part is not the fear. It is the certainty, the knowledge that whatever is following me is patient. It does not need to rush. It has all the time in the world, and I have only the time it allows me. I do not know what it wants. I do not know when it will take what it came for. All I know is that I am not the first, and I will not be the last. Hex Hollow is still there, waiting for the next curious soul who thinks they are brave enough to face the darkness. The next person who believes that old stories are just stories. I hope you are smarter than I was. I hope you listen to the warning I'm giving you now. Because once you cross that threshold, there is no going back. The dead do not forget, and they do not forgive. So here's my question for you. If you knew a place was truly haunted, truly dangerous, would you still go? Would your curiosity be stronger than your fear? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know if I am the only fool who could not resist. Story 4. 7 Gates of York County. I had been driving for 19 hours straight when I realized the GPS was taking me somewhere that shouldn't exist. The timestamp on my phone read 2:47 a.m. I was somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, deep in York County, following the blue line on my navigation screen. I was supposed to be cutting through on Route 83, but after my car started making that grinding noise near Gettysburg, I took what I thought was a shortcut. The GPS assured me it would save me 40 minutes. That was a lie, the kind of lie that changes everything. The road I was on had no name on any sign I passed. No numbers, no markings, just a black ribbon of asphalt that seemed to absorb the light from my headlights rather than reflect it. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches twisted and bare even though it was only November. The air felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. You know that feeling you get when you walk into a room and something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. That feeling was pressing against my windshield like a living thing. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother asking where I was. I didn't answer. I couldn't explain that I didn't anymore. That the real world seemed to be fading behind me with every mile I took. Then I saw the first gate. It appeared without warning at 2:53 a.m., rising up out of the darkness like a rusted skeleton. 7 feet tall, forged from iron that looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. It stood in the middle of the road, not blocking it completely, but positioned at an angle, as if inviting me to make a choice. The fence attached to it stretched into the forest on both sides, disappearing into the black. There were no houses nearby, no property markers, no explanation for why a gate would be standing alone on an empty road in the Pennsylvania woods. I knew what this was. I had heard about it once, years ago, at a bonfire in college. The 7 Gates of York County. Urban legend territory. The kind of story people tell to scare each other, and then they forget it by morning. But I hadn't forgotten. And I suddenly understood why. I stopped the car. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from something else. Recognition, maybe, or dread. The kind of dread that comes from realizing you are exactly where you were supposed to end up, even though you didn't. You were looking for it. The gate had a chain and padlock, but the chain was loose. It hung like a broken arm. I could have turned around. I should have turned around, but something made me get out of the car. Something pulled me toward that gate the way a compass needle points north. I didn't to question it. I was too tired to question anything anymore. The gate hinges screamed when I pushed it open. The sound echoed through the forest in both directions, a metallic shriek that seemed to travel for miles. When the noise finally died, I heard something underneath it, a low hum, not quite mechanical, not quite human. It came from deeper in the forest, past where my flashlight could reach. I drove through the gate. The road on the other side was different, smoother somehow, despite being older. The asphalt was cracked in patterns that almost looked intentional, like symbols carved into the black surface. My headlights caught on something reflective about 200 yards ahead, a sign. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting. As I got closer, I could make out letters. Not English letters. At least, not in any arrangement that made sense. They looked like they had been spray painted over older letters, many times, creating a palimpsest of graffiti that had built up like scar tissue. But underneath all that, I could just barely read the original text. York County Psychiatric Hospital. Founded 1887. Closed 1962. Except there was no such hospital. I knew that because the legend was that it had burned down. That it had never officially burned down. That records of it had been erased. That it had existed in such a way that proved its own non-existence. The contradiction was the whole point. The reason people told the story. The reason it had stuck with me. The road curved deeper into the woods, and I followed it. I told myself I was looking for cell service. I told myself I would take a picture and send it to my college friends, prove that the legend was real. But those were just stories I was telling myself. The truth was simpler and more terrible. I was following that hum. It had gotten louder. It was inside my car now, vibrating in my chest, making my teeth ache. It sounded almost like singing. Not words, just a sound that the human voice could make if it wanted to express pure emptiness. The second gate appeared at 3:16 a.m. This one was smaller than the first, and somehow that made it worse. It was made of wood instead of iron, and the wood was soft and rotting. Vines grew through it. The fence attached to it was also wooden, and it had collapsed in places, creating gaps that the darkness seemed to fill completely. I got out of the car and walked through one of those gaps without opening the gate at all. The vines touched my face as I passed. They were warm. Impossible. They should have been cold. The hum was louder now. I could feel it in my bones. I could feel it changing me somehow, retuning me to a frequency I was never meant to exist at. The forest floor was covered with a carpet of needles and leaves that had been accumulating for a very long time. Nothing grew here except the vines and twisted trees. Nothing moved except me. Then I heard the first voice. It wasn't the voice exactly. It was more like the memory of a voice, played through a broken speaker. It came from somewhere to my left, back toward the trees. It said one word, over and over, just my first name. Marcus, 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 getting closer, never getting closer, staying the same distance away no matter where I moved. I ran back to my car. I didn't consciously decide to run. My body just did it. The keys were still in the ignition. I turned the engine over and it roared to life, a sound that seemed impossibly loud after the quiet of the forest. I drove forward without looking back, without checking my mirrors, without doing anything except pushing the accelerator to the floor. The road curved again. Third gate. I crashed through it. The wooden frame splintered against my hood and windshield. Something else came through with the splinters. Something that looked like bones and smoke and the suggestion of a shape. It was only there for a moment. Then it was gone, but the temperature in my car dropped 30 degrees in the space between heartbeats. I was counting them now. 7 gates. That was the legend. 7 gates you had to pass through. 7 chances to turn back. 7 lines you could cross before something changed permanently. I had passed through 3. I had 4 left. At 3:34 a.m., I passed through the 4th gate. This one was made of glass. Not like a window, like a gate made entirely of mirrors. All angled differently, all showing me different reflections. Most of them showed the road behind me. A few of them showed the road ahead. And a few of them showed something else. A building, massive, with broken windows like dead eyes. with a foundation that seemed to extend deeper into the earth than buildings should be able to go. The York County Psychiatric Hospital, the hospital that had never existed. It was real. It was there. I could see it in the mirrors. And in one of the mirrors, I could see myself. But I was walking toward the building, and I was much, much thinner than I should be. And my skin had the pale, luminescent quality of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in a very long time. The gate scattered when I drove through it. The glass didn't break. It dissolved. It turned to dust that glowed faintly as it drifted across my windshield. The hum had reached a frequency now that I could no longer hear it externally. It was happening inside my body. My vision was starting to blur at the edges. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else. The fifth gate was smaller still. It was made of bone. I could see the curves and knots in the ivory surface as I approached it. It had been carved with intricate designs, patterns that hurt to look at directly. I didn't slow down. I couldn't slow down. My car hit it at 50 miles per hour. The bone didn't splinter. It absorbed the impact. The entire vehicle lurched as if I had just driven into water. When I looked down at the steering wheel, I could see my hands. I could see the veins under the skin, but the veins were glowing faintly, blue and purple in colors I didn't have names for. This was new. This wasn't in the legend. Or maybe it was. Maybe people who passed through 5 didn't come back to tell what happened. 6 gates, 2 left. The 6th gate appeared on a straightaway that should have been straight but wasn't. The road had started spiraling now, spiraling down into something. The earth on either side of the road had fallen away, revealing layers of soil and rock and things that weren't to soil or rock. The gate was made of something that shifted when I looked at it. Metal, flesh, fabric, all three, all at once. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It made me cry. I didn't break. I didn't hesitate. I drove through it and felt it pass through me. Every cell of my body reorganizing. Every memory I had been edited and rewritten. I could remember my childhood. But I could also remember being young in 1887. I could remember wearing an asylum uniform made of rough canvas. I could remember screaming in a room with white walls and no windows. The 7th gate was open. Not closed, not even particularly gate-like anymore. It was just a frame, a doorway. Beyond it, I could see the parking lot of the psychiatric hospital. Except it wasn't a parking lot. It was a courtyard, and the building I could see beyond wasn't a single building. It was many buildings, connected by covered walkways and strange bridges. Windows on every wall, every window dark and reflective like an eye looking outward but seeing inward. I stopped the car. My foot was shaking too much to keep pressure on the accelerator. I sat there in the darkness, with the engine idling, and I made a choice. I could drive through that final gate. I could complete the passage. I could become whatever people became when they finished the 7 gates. They would find my car empty on some forest road. They would search for my body. They would never find it. Because I would be here. I would be part of this place. Or I could turn around. I turned around. I don't. Do you know why? I expected the gates to be gone. I expected the road behind me to have turned into something else. But it hadn't. The gates were all open now. All the way back through the forest. 7 gates forming a path backward toward the real world. I drove fast. I didn't stop until I saw the light of a highway convenience store glowing through the trees. When I pulled into the parking lot, I looked at the time on my dashboard. 2:47 a.m., the same time I had seen when I started down that road. No time had passed, or 3 hours had passed and been erased, or I hadn't driven through those gates at all. I was still driving through them. Every moment of my life now was me, frozen on that forest road, passing through gates that opened onto something that shouldn't exist. The convenience store clerk didn't look at me funny when I came inside. She rang up my coffee without comment. When I looked in the mirror by the register, I looked normal. Tired, but normal. My hands weren't glowing. My skin had color. My reflection looked right, except in the corner of the mirror, where the angle caught it wrong. I could see something else. A building, a room, a window, and pressed against that window, a face that had once been mine, calling out my name. Marcus, 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 asking why I had left, asking when I was coming back. I drive for 3 hours every evening now, the same route, the same roads. I don't. Do you know why I do it? I am not looking for anything. I am just trying to prove that the gates aren't still there. I am trying to prove that I made it all the way through the seventh one and came out the other side into a normal world that still makes sense. But every night around 2:45 a.m., the GPS on my phone starts acting strangely. The map rotates slightly, just a few degrees, as if the roads are being redrawn. And I feel that pull again. That inexplicable gravity pulling me toward a forest road in York County where gates stand open in the dark. I know I want to be able to resist forever. One of these nights, I'm going to let myself pass through all 7. And then I'll finally understand what it means to not exist in a place that was never supposed to exist in the first place. Here is my question for you. If you discovered that a place you believed was just a legend was actually real, would you turn back? Or would you need to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost you? Leave your answer in the comments and tell me what you would do. Story 5. River Witch. This bargain. I killed a man because a dead woman told me to. That is the truth, plain and simple, and I know how it sounds. But before you stop listening, before you decide I'm just another lunatic with a story, let me tell you about Marietta, Pennsylvania, and the thing that lives in the river there. The thing that has been living there for almost 100 years, waiting for someone desperate enough to listen. I moved to Marietta last spring after losing everything. My business failed, my wife left, my kids stopped returning my calls. At 47 years old, I found myself starting over in a town I had never heard of, renting a 1-bedroom apartment above an antique shop on Front Street, right along the Susquehanna River. The locals were friendly enough, in that cautious small-town way. But I noticed something strange within my first week. Nobody went near the river after dark. Not to fish, not to walk, not for any reason. The waterfront that should have been the town's main attraction sat empty every evening, as if an invisible barrier kept people away. I asked my landlord about it, an old man named Dutch who lived in Marietta his entire life. He just shook his head and told me some places have long memories, that the river remembers things that happened a lifetime ago, and smart people respect that. I should have listened, but I was angry at my ex-wife, angry at my former business partner who stolen clients and ruined my reputation, angry at a world that seemed designed to crush people like me. I started taking long walks at night, and the empty riverfront became my destination. There was something calming about the dark water, the way it moved silently past, indifferent to human problems. That is where I first saw her. It was a Friday night in late May. The air was thick and humid, pressing down like a wet blanket. I was sitting on a bench near the old railroad bridge, watching the river, when I noticed a woman standing at the water's edge about 50 feet downstream. She wore a long dark dress, the kind you might see in historical photos, and her gray hair hung loose past her shoulders. She was just standing there, perfectly still, staring into the water. Something about her posture seemed wrong, too rigid, like a mannequin positioned by someone who didn't quite understand how human bodies work. I called out to her, asked if she was okay. She didn't respond, didn't move. I walked closer, my footsteps loud on the wooden boardwalk. When I got within 20 feet, she turned her head to look at me. Her face was waterlogged, skin gray and puffy, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. Her mouth hung open slightly, and I could see that her tongue was black. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. Just empty space where she'd been standing, and the river flowing past as if nothing had happened. I convinced myself it was stress, exhaustion, my mind playing tricks after months of anxiety and sleeping pills. I went home and tried to forget about it. But the next night, I saw her again. Same spot, same impossible stillness. This time, I didn't approach. I watched from a distance as she stood there for nearly an hour before slowly turning and walking into the river. Just walking forward until the water closed over her head and she disappeared beneath the surface. No splash, no struggle, just gone. The third night, she spoke to me. I had decided to avoid the riverfront, but my feet carried me there anyway, as if pulled by some magnetic force I couldn't resist. She was waiting on my usual bench, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, water dripping steadily from her hair and clothes onto the wooden planks. She told me her name was Nellie Knoll, that she lived in Marietta in the 1920s and 30s, that she'd been known as a powwow doctor, someone who practiced the old German magic that Pennsylvania Dutch settlers had brought from Europe. People came to her for healing, for love spells, for protection against hexes. But her real gift was darker. She could sense hatred, could taste revenge in the air like copper on her tongue. And she helped people act on those feelings. For a price. In 1928, she advised a man named John Blymeyer to kill another man named Nelson Remeyer. Told Blymeyer that Remeyer had hexed him. That the only way to break the curse was to obtain Remeyer, his spell book, and a lock of his hair. The plan went wrong. Remeyer died. Blymeyer went to prison, and Nellie Knoll drowned herself in the Susquehanna River 3 days later, weighted down with stones, unable to live with what she helped set in motion. But death hadn't stopped her. The river had kept her, preserved her, given her a different kind of existence. She had been waiting ever since, watching from the water, looking for people who carried the same poison she carried. The rage, the need for revenge, the willingness to do terrible things. People like me. She told me she knew about my business partner, Marcus, how he systematically destroyed everything I'd built, stolen my clients by spreading lies about my competence, forged documents to make it look like I'd been embezzling. He'd taken my life, this work, and twisted it into his own success story while I spiraled into bankruptcy and divorce. The thing sitting on that bench wearing Nellie Knoll, this corpse, told me she could help. That she still had power, even from beyond death. That she could show me how to make things right. All I had to do was visit her 3 more times, listen to her instructions, and then complete the task she would give me. I should have run, should have moved out of Marietta that same night. But the anger inside me was a living thing, and it wanted what she was offering. It wanted justice. It wanted Marcus to pay for what he'd done. So I came back the next night, and the next, and the next. Each time, Nellie told me more. About Marcus, his routines, his habits, the fact that he'd be driving through Pennsylvania in 2 weeks on his way to a conference in Pittsburgh. She told me about a specific stretch of Route 30, a winding section through the woods where cell service was spotty and traffic was light late at night. She told me exactly what I needed to do. The plan was simple, elegant, even. Marcus would be driving that route on a Tuesday night. I would cause an accident, make it look random, unavoidable. His car would go off the road in a specific location where Nellie assured me the crash would be fatal. And because of the remoteness and the way the accident would be staged, nobody would suspect anything other than tragic bad luck. On my 4th visit, Nellie gave me something. She reached into the river and pulled out a small cloth bag, dry despite coming from the water. Inside was a mixture of herbs and what looked like bone fragments. She told me to burn this at the accident site beforehand. That it would ensure everything went according to plan. That it would make the authorities overlook any small inconsistencies they might otherwise notice. The magic would protect me, she said. The river would protect me. I took the bag. I made my preparations. And on that Tuesday night, I drove to the designated spot on Route 30 and set everything up. I burned the contents of Nellie's bag at the roadside, watching the smoke twist up into the darkness. The smell was terrible, like rotting meat and sulfur. When it was done, I moved a fallen branch into the road, positioning it exactly where Nellie had specified. Then I waited in my car, hidden up a side road, watching. Marcus' headlights appeared right on schedule. His BMW came around the curve going too fast, just as Nellie had predicted. He swerved to avoid the branch. His car left the road exactly where he said it would. The crash was spectacular. The BMW tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling 3 times before slamming into a tree. I heard the impact from 200 yards away, a sound like thunder that echoed through the forest. I waited 15 minutes, making sure no other cars came by. Then I walked down to check, to make sure he was dead, to fulfill my end of the bargain. Marcus was pinned in the wreckage, his body twisted at angles that made my stomach turn. But his eyes were open, and he was still breathing. He looked at me with recognition and terror, tried to speak but only managed a wet, gurgling sound. I should have called for help, should have tried to save him, but the anger was still there, and Nellie, his voice was in my head, telling me to finish it. That he deserved this, that justice demanded completion. I found a heavy rock near the wreckage. I raised it above my head, and that is when I saw them. Dozens of figures standing in the trees around the crash site, men and women in old-fashioned clothes. Their faces gray and waterlogged, their eyes empty holes. They were all watching me, waiting. Nellie Knoll stood at the front of the crowd, smiling with her black tongue visible between her lips. They weren't there to help me. They were there to collect. Because that is what I hadn't understood. The bargain wasn't about revenge. It was about addition. Every person Nellie had helped over the decades, everyone who accepted her dark gift and completed her tasks, they all ended up in the river. They all became part of her collection. Spirits bound to the water, forever serving the river witch, forever helping her find new victims. Marcus died while I stood there frozen, the rocks still raised above my head. His last breath rattled out, and the figures in the trees moved closer. Nellie told me the truth then, that I was bound now, that when my time came, whether in a year or 10 years or 50, the river would claim me. I would drown, just as she had drowned, and I would join her collection of the damned. Forever walking the waterfront of Marietta, forever helping her find others consumed by rage and revenge. The only way to delay it was to bring her more, to identify people like I had been. People desperate enough and angry enough to listen. To whisper in their ears about the river witch who could help them. To continue the cycle. They've been doing this for 4 months now. They've found 3 people so far. Told them about Nellie. Watched them take those first steps down to the riverfront. Do you know if they completed their tasks yet? I try not to think about it, but the river is calling to me more strongly every day. I feel the pull of the water. I dream about walking into the Susquehanna, about the cold current closing over my head. Sometimes I wake up and find myself standing at the river's edge with no memory of how I got there. Marcus, his death was ruled an accident, just as Nellie promised. Nobody suspects anything. I could leave Marietta now, move somewhere else, try to forget. But it wouldn't matter. The river would find me. The bargain is eternal. I am telling you this because I need you to understand something. If you ever driving through small-town Pennsylvania and you feel that pull, that anger that makes you want to hurt someone who wronged you, be careful. Be very careful about who you talk to, about what voices you listen to in the dark. Because the river witch is always looking, always waiting. And once you accept her help, once you complete that first terrible task, you belong to her. Your soul is measured not in years but in the number of others you can bring to her attention before the water finally claims you. The authorities never found the branch I used to cause Marcus this accident. They never found the burn marks from Nellie's bag. The magic worked exactly as promised. I am safe from human justice, but I will never be safe from her. I can see her now, outside my window, standing on the street in the rain. Water streams from her gray hair. Her black tongue protrudes slightly from her mouth. She is beckoning to me. It's time for my nightly walk to the riverfront. Time to watch for new prospects. Time to serve the river witch of Marietta. And someday soon, it will be time to walk into the water and never come back. So it's my question for you. If someone you hated more than anything in the world had destroyed your life completely, and a supernatural force offered you the perfect revenge but you knew it would cost you your soul, would you take that bargain? Would the satisfaction of revenge be worth eternal damnation? Write your answer in the comments, because I need to know if I'm the only one weak enough to have said yes. She is at my door now. The river witch is calling me home. Story 6. Panther Days and Nights. There is something in the woods behind my property that should not exist, and I have been watching it hunt my neighbors for the past 6 months. And I have not told anyone because I am afraid that if I do, it will know that I know. My name is Marcus Webb, and I live 40 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, in a small town called Millvale. Population just under 3,000. The kind of place where everybody knows your business and nobody minds their own. I moved here 5 years ago after my divorce, looking for a place where I could disappear into the background. A house on the edge of town seemed perfect. 2 acres, deep woods on 3 sides. Only one neighbor visible from my property, and he did not seem like the type who would show up unannounced. Everything was peaceful until last November. That is when the first tracks appeared. I discovered them while taking a walk through the woods on a Sunday morning. Heavy snow had fallen the night before, and everything was fresh and white and clean. Perfect for tracking. And there they were, paw prints, large ones, cat-like, the size of a man, his fist, each one. The prints were arranged in a straight line, the way big cats walk, placing their hind feet directly in front of their front feet. The line stretched from the deep forest all the way to the edge of my property, where it stopped as if the animal had simply decided to wait there, watching the house. I told myself it was probably a large dog, a stray that had wandered up from the valley, except the prints were wrong. The spacing between them was too wide. The depth was too heavy. A dog that large would have broken through the snow and created divots. These prints were clean and precise. Professional. The prints of something that knew exactly how much weight it needed to apply to the snow to achieve maximum stealth. The tracks disappeared after a week, but other people started reporting them around the same time. Old Jim Kowalski, who lived 2 miles south, mentioned them at the grocery store. Said something large had been prowling around his property at night. Said his dogs would not go outside after dark anymore. Said he had heard something that sounded like a big cat, making a sound somewhere between a scream and a roar, but deeper than a roar. Older, hunger made manifest a sound. The official explanation was that it was probably a young cougar that had wandered down from the mountains. Pennsylvania had not had native mountain lions since the 1800s, but every couple of years, young males would range farther east from the western states. The state wildlife officials said they would send a tracker out. They never did. By January, 3 people had reported seeing it. Not just tracks, the animal itself. The descriptions were all similar. Large, dark, feline, 6 feet long, maybe more. The color of burnt coal. Moving through the forest like it owned the place. Moving through the forest like it was hunting. One man said he had seen it watching his kitchen window at night, pressing its face against the glass, its eyes reflecting his porch light like 2 green coins. I did not see it myself. Not at first. But I started finding evidence of it on my property. Scat in the woods, full of fur and bones. Scratches on the trunks of trees, 7 feet high. Places where the snow had been disturbed, pawed at, like the creature was searching for something. Once, I found what looked like a deer carcass that had been partially eaten. The kill was fresh, maybe an hour old. I started looking for it deliberately after that. I know that sounds insane, but there was something about knowing that it was there, in the woods behind my house, that I needed to see it. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I needed to look into its eyes and understand it. I never saw it directly, but I came close. Many times, I would be walking through the forest and I would feel the temperature drop suddenly. The birds would stop singing. The wind would change direction, and I would know, with absolute certainty, that the creature was nearby, watching me, assessing me, wondering if I was worth the effort of hunting. Then the attacks started. The first one happened in early February. A woman named Carol Hendricks, who lived about 1.5 miles from me, was found in her yard with claw marks across her back and shoulders. She said she had gone out to get firewood and something had come at her from the darkness. She said it had tried to pull her backward into the woods. She said she had screamed and fought and somehow managed to break free and run inside the house. When she got there, her back was bleeding. Not badly, but the marks were definitely claw marks. 5 of them, parallel, exactly spaced. She went to the hospital. The doctor said it looked like something with 4 toes on each hand, or paw, or whatever it was. They recommended she file a report with the state wildlife officials. She did, and again, nothing happened. 2 weeks later, Jim Kowalski disappeared. He went out one evening to move his trash cans before collection day. He never came back. His wife called the police. They searched the area around his house and found his body 300 yards into the woods. What was left of it? There was a lot of blood. There was also a lot of his body that was simply gone. The coroner ruled it an animal attack. The state finally sent people out. They set traps. They installed motion cameras. They put out warnings about the panther, because that was what people were calling it now. The panther. Local news picked up the story. People started calling it the Black Panther. People started saying it was 500 pounds. People started saying they had seen it in their yards, their driveways, their garages. Every sighting was slightly different, but they all agreed on one thing. The animal was getting bolder. It was not afraid of humans anymore. It was actively hunting humans. I knew better. It was not getting bolder. It was not hunting everyone. It was selective. It was intelligent. It was choosing its victims. And I had started to figure out who it was choosing. The pattern became obvious in March. The people who were being attacked or killed were all people who were connected to the same business. An old pharmaceutical manufacturing plant about 10 miles from my house. The plant had been closed for 30 years, but it still stood. A massive concrete structure with broken windows and a reputation for danger. Kids used to dare each other to go inside it. People who needed a place to hide something used to go to the plant. 3 of the 5 people who had been attacked by the panther had worked at the plant when it was still operating. The woman who disappeared, the man who was killed, and Jim Kowalski. I looked up their names in the local newspaper archives. I found that they had all been part of a group of employees who had been present during an incident in 1987. An incident that had been quickly covered up. An incident involving an experimental drug and an animal that had escaped from the research section of the facility. The story was buried in the archives. A small article, barely 100 words, explaining that the plant had suffered a containment breach. An experimental animal, species unknown, had been released during the incident. 3 employees had suffered injuries. The animal had been recaptured and the situation had been resolved. No further details were available. The article was dated March 5, 1987. Exactly 40 years ago, I drove to the plant. I parked my truck at the gate and walked around the perimeter. The fence had rusted and fallen in places. I could see through the gaps to the building interior. The windows were massive and mostly broken. Inside, I could see cages, large cages, rows of them, extending back into the darkness. Some of the cages were still intact. Some had been torn apart from the inside. I did not go closer. I did not want to. Something was telling me that if I crossed that fence, if I went into that building, I would not come back out. And I knew, with the certainty of deep instinct, that I was right. But I knew what was happening now. The panther was not something that had wandered down from the west. The panther was something that had been engineered, created, experimented on in that facility. Something that had been kept in a cage for decades. And now, somehow, it had gotten out. Or someone had let it out. And it was killing the people who had heard it. The people who had been there when it was taken. The people who had confined it and experimented on it and treated it as a thing rather than a being. I went home and I started researching. I found more articles. The pharmaceutical company had been investigating a drug treatment that could enhance human strength and resilience. The tests had been conducted on animals first, specifically on large predators, specifically on a black panther that had been purchased from a private breeding operation in Florida. The drug had worked too well. The treated panther had become something else, something stronger, faster, more intelligent, more aware. The company had realized it had created something it could not control. They had tried to terminate the experiment. During the termination process, something had gone wrong. The panther had escaped. It had made its way into the surrounding forest and it had survived there for 40 years, isolated and alone and furious. Until now. Until the people who had heard it started dying. I saw it one night in April. I was looking out my back window and there it was, standing in the clearing behind my house. I could see every detail. The rippling muscles under the black fur. The scars across its body where the scientists had attached equipment. The missing patch of fur on its shoulder where they had injected the experimental drug. The eyes were what got me. They were intelligent. They were aware. They were ancient and vengeful and full of a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It looked at me, not through me, at me, and in that moment, I understood that I was going to be next. I had worked at the plant, not in the research section. I had been part of the maintenance crew, but I had been there. On that day in March, I had seen them loading the panther into a cage after it had been recaptured. I had seen the scientists poking at it with sticks. I had heard the sounds it made, sounds that no animal should make, sounds that sounded almost like language, almost like words. I had been a kid. I was just looking for a summer job. I had not known what I was seeing, but the panther remembered. The panther knew. I did not sleep that night. I waited for it to come, but it did not. It simply sat in the clearing and watched the house, watching me, studying me, deciding if I was worth hunting, if I was worth killing, if I was worth the effort of revenge. When dawn came, it disappeared, melted back into the forest. But I knew it would return. I knew that my time was running out. The other survivors of that day were gone now. Some dead, some missing. Only a few of us remained. And the panther was methodically working through the list. I have considered going to the police. I have considered telling them everything I know. But what would I tell them? That an experimental super panther has been stalking through the forests for 40 years waiting for revenge? That the creature is intelligent and cunning and deliberately hunting the people who heard it? They would lock me up. They would think I was insane. I have considered leaving, getting in my truck and driving away from here, disappearing into another town, another state, another life. But I know that will not work. The panther knows what I know. It will follow me. It will find me eventually. The only thing I have done is delay the inevitable. So I am waiting. I am living in this house and I am watching the forest behind it and I am waiting for the panther to come for me. I have stopped locking the doors at night. I have stopped closing the curtains. I have accepted what is going to happen. But here's the thing that terrifies me most. Here's the thing that keeps me awake at 3 in the morning, staring out into the darkness. I do not believe it is coming to kill me. I think it is coming to show me something. I think it wants me to understand what it is. What we made it, what we created and abandoned and forgot about and let loose on the world. I think it wants me to help it. And sometimes, On nights when the moon is dark and the wind is moving through the trees in a particular way, I hear it calling. Not a roar, a sound that is almost like words, almost like a name. My name, calling me into the forest, asking me to come, asking me to join. I do not know how much longer I can resist that call. Tell me this, if you discovered that something you had hurt without knowing was hunting you, and that hunting was actually justice, would you run from it, or would you accept your fate as deserved? Write your answer in the comments, and tell me what you would do. Story 7. Book that wouldn't. T. Byrne. Have you ever held something in your hands that felt wrong? Not dangerous in any obvious way. Just wrong, like the object itself was watching you, waiting to see what you would do next. I found a book like that 3 weeks ago in York County, Pennsylvania. And I have not slept through the night since. My name is Michael Brandt. I am 47 years old. I have worked as a building inspector for 22 years. I have crawled through attics, basements, and crawl spaces in hundreds of old homes across rural Pennsylvania. I have seen water damage, mold infestations, structural failures, and animal remains in various states of decay. Nothing has ever disturbed me. I am not a superstitious man. I do not believe in ghosts, curses, or magic. At least, I did not believe in those things until I found the book. The inspection was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in late October. The property was a farmhouse in a remote area south of York, down a series of increasingly narrow roads that wound through dense forest and forgotten farmland. My GPS lost signal twice. The last 3 miles were on an unmarked gravel road that dropped into a hollow so deep the afternoon sunlight barely reached the forest floor. The house appeared through the trees like something emerging from a fever dream. 2 stories of weathered clapboard siding, sagging porches, windows filmed with decades of grime. The real estate agent had warned me the property had been vacant for years. The previous owner had died, and the estate was finally being settled by distant relatives who had never even seen the place. I parked my truck and sat there for a moment, studying the house through my windshield. Something felt off. The silence was too complete. No birds singing, no insects chirping. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. The trees surrounding the hollow stood perfectly still, their bare branches reaching toward the gray October sky like the fingers of buried hands. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I grabbed my clipboard, my flashlight, and my camera, and I walked toward the front door. The porch steps groaned beneath my weight. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a sound like a long, slow exhale, releasing air that smelled of wood smoke and something older. Something I could not identify. I stepped inside. The interior was dim, even with my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Dust particles floated in the beam like tiny spirits disturbed from their rest. The furniture was still arranged as if someone had just stepped away. A rocking chair faced the cold fireplace. A table held a coffee cup. The liquid inside long evaporated, leaving a dark stain on the porcelain. A clock on the wall above the stove had stopped at 12:01. I moved through the downstairs rooms, taking photographs and making notes. The foundation appeared sound. The walls showed no signs of significant water damage. The kitchen was outdated but functional. A normal inspection of an abnormally preserved house. Then I noticed the floor. In the parlor, just in front of the fireplace, someone had installed a sheet of plexiglass over a section of the hardwood. I knelt down and shined my flashlight through the clear barrier. The wood beneath was charred black in an irregular pattern. Burn marks that had been preserved intentionally. Protected. Displayed like a museum exhibit. I felt the first real chill then. Not from the temperature, which was cold but bearable. This chill came from somewhere deeper. From something inside me that recognized danger before my conscious mind caught up. I stood and continued my inspection. I found the stairs and climbed to the second floor. The bedrooms were small, the furniture covered in white sheets that had yellowed with age. I documented everything, working quickly now, eager to finish and leave this place behind. The last room was a small study at the end of the hall. The door was closed. When I turned the knob, I felt resistance. Not locked, but stuck. I pushed harder, and the door scraped open across warped floorboards. The room was empty except for a desk, a chair, and a single bookshelf built into the wall. The desk drawers hung open. The chair was overturned, signs of a struggle, frozen in time for nearly a century. The bookshelf held only one item, a small leather-bound volume, its cover cracked and worn, its pages yellowed and brittle. I crossed the room and picked it up without thinking. The moment my fingers touched the leather, I felt heat. Not imagined heat, real warmth radiating from the cover, as if the book had been sitting in sunlight, though the room was dark and cold. I opened to the title page. The text was in German, printed in an old-fashioned typeface. But beneath the German title, someone had written in English with faded ink, "The long-lost friend." I did not know what those words meant. Not then, but something in my chest tightened. My heart began beating faster. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to put the book down and walk away. I did not listen. Instead, I slipped the book into my bag and finished my inspection. I drove home as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the empty roads. I did not think about the book during the drive. I did not think about it as I ate dinner, watched television, and prepared for bed. It sat in my bag by the front door, waiting. That night, I dreamed of fire. I stood in the parlor of the farmhouse, but the room was different. Warmer, alive with flickering candlelight. A man sat in the rocking chair, his back to me. He was large, broad-shouldered, with gray hair that touched his collar. He did not turn around, but I knew he was aware of my presence. I tried to speak, but no words came. I tried to move, but my feet were rooted to the floor. The man began rocking slowly, the chair creaking in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Then he spoke. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. They came for the book. They thought burning it would set them free. But some things cannot be destroyed by fire. Some things only grow stronger. He turned his head, and I saw his face. The skin was blackened and split. His eyes were white, filmed over with ash. His lips pulled back in a smile that revealed teeth stained with soot. "Now you have it, and it has you." I woke up gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The clock read 12:01 a.m. The next morning, I researched the property. What I found made the blood drain from my face. The farmhouse in the hollow had a name. Locals called it the Hex House. In November 1928, a man named Nelson Remeyer was murdered there by 3 men who believed he had cursed them. They came looking for his spell book, a volume called The Long-Lost Friend, which was used by practitioners of Pennsylvania Dutch folk magic known as powwow. They wanted to burn the book, believing it would break the hex that plagued them. When they could not find the book, they killed Remeyer instead, beat him to death, tied his body to a chair, poured kerosene over him and set him ablaze. But here's the part that made my hands shake as I read the words on my computer screen. The fire did not spread. Despite the kerosene, despite the wooden house, the flames went out on their own. The house survived. The killers were caught because Remeyer's body was found the next day, barely burned, as if something had protected it. As if something had protected the house. The clock above the stove had stopped at 12:01, the moment of death preserved forever. I went to my bag. The book was still there. The long-lost friend, Remeyer's spellbook. The book they could not find. The book they killed him trying to destroy. It should have been taken as evidence. It should have been lost to history. Instead, it sat in my bag, waiting for me. I picked it up. The leather was warm again under my fingers. I opened to a random page and found an incantation written in flowing script. The words were in German, but somehow I understood their meaning. A charm for protection against enemies. A prayer to bind evil. Below the printed text, someone had added notes in the margins. The handwriting was cramped and difficult to read, but I made out fragments. Names and dates, descriptions of ailments cured and curses cast. A record of power wielded across generations. The last entry was dated November 1928. It read, "They are coming tonight. I have seen their faces in the water. They will not find what they seek." I closed the book and set it on my kitchen table. My rational mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Someone had planted the book. A prank or a hoax designed to frighten superstitious tourists. The property would probably be marketed as a haunted attraction. Ghost hunters would pay good money to spend the night in a genuine hex house. But I could not explain the warmth of the leather. I could not explain how the book had ended up in that hidden room, undiscovered for almost a century. I could not explain my dreams. That night, I locked the book in my basement storage closet. I told myself I would contact a local historical society in the morning. Donate it to a museum. Get it out of my house and out of my life. At 12:01 a.m., I woke to the smell of wood smoke. I followed the scent downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The basement door was open. The storage closet was open. The book sat on my kitchen table, exactly where I had placed it the night before. I had locked both doors. I remembered turning the keys. I remembered hearing the bolts click into place. The book was open to a new page. An incantation I had not seen before. The words seemed to writhe on the paper, shifting and reforming as I watched. I blinked, and they were still, but I could have sworn they spelled out my name. I did what any rational person would do. I took the book outside, dropped it in my fire pit, doused it with lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. The flames roared up, orange and hungry. The leather cover curled and blackened. The pages caught fire, their edges glowing red before crumbling to ash. I stood there watching until the fire died down to embers. I stirred the ashes with a stick, making sure nothing remained. I went inside, showered, and tried to sleep. The nightmares came again. Remeyer in his chair, turning to face me with his burned and ruined face. His voice echoing in the darkness. Some things cannot be destroyed by fire. When I woke at 12:01 a.m., the book was on my nightstand. Not burned, not damaged, the leather cover was smooth and cool under my trembling fingers. The pages were intact, unmarked by flame. I opened to the title page and found new words written there in fresh ink. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The words were in my own handwriting. You cannot destroy what is already part of you. I have spent the past 2 weeks trying everything. I have buried the book in my backyard. It appeared on my pillow. I have thrown it in a dumpster across town. It was waiting in my truck when I returned. I have driven it to another state and left it in a motel room. It was sitting on my kitchen table when I got home. Still warm, still waiting. I have stopped sleeping. I cannot close my eyes without seeing Remeyer's face, without hearing his voice, without feeling the book calling to me from wherever I have tried to abandon it. Yesterday, I did more research. I found records from the 1929 trial, testimony from John Blymeyer, the man who led the attack on Remeyer. He claimed the hex was broken the moment Remeyer died. He lived another 40 years, never harming anyone again. But here's what no one seems to have considered. If the hex was broken, what happened to the power that created it? Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred, transformed. The book was never found during the investigation. The killers searched the house but came up empty. The police searched later and found nothing. For almost a century, the book remained hidden, until I found it, or until it found me. I understand now what the book wants. It showed me in my dreams last night the faces of everyone who has wronged me, coworkers who took credit for my work, friends who betrayed my trust, family members who forgot I existed, their faces floating in darkness, marked for something I do not want to name. The book offers power, protection against enemies, justice against those who deserve punishment. All I have to do is read the words, speak the incantations, let the old magic flow through me the way it flowed through Remeyer and the practitioners before him. Part of me wants to resist. Part of me knows this is wrong. But that part grows quieter every day, every sleepless night, every time I wake at 12:01 a.m. to find the book waiting beside me. I drove back to the Hollow today, stood outside the Hex house in the fading afternoon light. The plexiglass still covered the burn marks on the parlor floor. The clock still read 12:01. Nothing had changed in nearly 100 years. Except me. I sat in the rocking chair. I faced the fireplace where they tried to burn Remeyer's body. I held the book in my hands and felt its warmth spreading through my fingers, up my arms, into my chest. The chair began rocking on its own, slow at first, then matching my heartbeat. I opened the book. I am writing this now as a warning, or maybe as a confession. I do not know which anymore. The line between victim and perpetrator blurs when you hold power in your hands. When you feel the weight of everything you could do pressing against the inside of your skull. They say the men who killed Remeyer believed burning the book would set them free. They were wrong. The book survived. It always survives. It just waits for the next person to find it. The next person desperate enough, broken enough, angry enough to pick it up and open its pages. I was not looking for magic when I walked into that house. I was just doing my job, inspecting foundations and checking for water damage, following my clipboard through rooms that had witnessed murder. But the book was looking for me. Tonight, I will read the first incantation. I have already chosen the words, already traced my finger along the yellowed pages. The warmth has spread through my whole body now. I can feel it behind my eyes when I look at people, judging them, measuring them against crimes both real and imagined. Is this how Remeyer felt? Is this what the killers sensed in him that drove them to such desperate violence? Maybe they were right to be afraid. Maybe they knew what the book could do to a person, what it could make them become. Some things cannot be destroyed by fire. Some things only grow stronger. The clock on my wall just chimed. I do not need to look to know what time it reads. 12:01. The book is open in front of me. The words are waiting to be spoken. The power is there for the taking. I used to be a building inspector. A normal man with a normal life. Someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. But normal is just a story we tell ourselves. A foundation we build on sand. And foundations, as I have learned, can shift beneath your feet without warning. Can drop you into hollows you never knew existed. Can trap you there forever. The long-lost friend. That is what the book is called. But I have come to understand the real meaning of that name. It is not about friends who are lost. It is about something lost finding its friend. Something ancient and patient reaching across years and miles to find the right hands to hold it. My hands. I am going to stop writing now. The incantation is simple. Just a few words, a few breaths, a door opening that can never be closed. If you ever find yourself on a narrow road in York County, Pennsylvania, winding down into a hollow where the trees stand too still and the silence presses against your ears, turn around. Do not stop at the weathered farmhouse. Do not look at the burn marks under the plexiglass. Do not check the clock above the stove. And if you find a book, leather-bound and warm to the touch, leave it where it lies. Some curses end with death. Others are just beginning. Now I have a question for you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments below. If you found a book that promised you power over everyone who ever hurt you, a book that could not be destroyed no matter how hard you tried, would you be strong enough to keep its pages closed forever? Or would curiosity and pain eventually win? Tell me your answer. I genuinely want to know. Because the book is patient, and it is always looking for new friends. Story 8. Fire that never dies. The smoke comes up through cracks in the road. That is the first thing you notice when you drive into Centralia. Not the abandoned houses, not the empty streets, just those thin wisps of gray vapor rising from the asphalt like the earth itself is breathing. I went there looking for my brother. That was important. I wasn't some urban explorer hunting for thrills or a YouTuber chasing content. I was searching for family. Michael had been missing for 6 weeks, and the last ping from his phone came from somewhere in Columbia County, Pennsylvania. A place that barely exists anymore. A town that has been burning from below for over 60 years. The GPS took me as far as Route 61, then gave up. The road just stops there. Ends in a barricade covered in graffiti. Beyond it, the old highway stretches into Centralia, buckled and cracked from the heat below. Steam rises from fissures that split the pavement like lightning frozen in stone. The air smells like sulfur and burning coal, like standing too close to a campfire that has been doused with chemicals. I parked and continued on foot. The silence was immediate and total. No birds, no insects, no wind through trees because they're airing no trees left. Just dead trunks standing like grave markers in soil too toxic to support life. The few houses still standing are skeletal. Windows empty, doors hanging open, everything covered in a fine gray ash that settles on your skin and tastes like metal. Michael's phone record showed he'd been here multiple times over the past month, making calls from the same location, a spot near the old town center, where the fire burns hottest, where the ground temperature can reach over 900 degrees just a few feet down. I couldn't understand why he kept coming back to this dead place. What could possibly draw someone here again and again? I found his car first, a Honda Civic parked on what used to be Locust Avenue. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. His wallet sat on the dashboard, untouched. Cash and cards still inside. Whatever happened to Michael? It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't anything that made sense. The houses around me stood in various states of decay. Most had been demolished decades ago when the government finally gave up and relocated the residents. But some remained, monuments to stubbornness or maybe just forgotten in the chaos of evacuation. I called Michael's name. My voice disappeared into the gray landscape without echo. That is when I saw the church. Still standing, still intact, St. Ignatius. The building looked almost maintained compared to everything around it. Paint peeling but not destroyed. Windows broken but not gone. And smoke, so much smoke pouring from every crack in the foundation. The ground around it glowed faint orange through gaps in the concrete. The fire was directly underneath. I approached carefully. The heat intensified with each step. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the October chill. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the temperature dropped suddenly. Unnaturally cold. My breath fogged in the air. The contrast was impossible. Outside, the ground was burning. Inside, it felt like a freezer. The pews were still arranged in neat rows. A Bible lay open on the altar. Candles stood ready to be lit, everything covered in that same gray ash. But in the center aisle, I found footprints. Recent. Leading from the door to a staircase at the back. Going down. Every instinct told me to leave. To call the police and let them handle this. But those were Michael's shoes. That distinct tread pattern from his hiking boots. I could recognize it anywhere. He'd gone down those stairs. Into the basement. Toward the fire. The stairs descended into darkness so complete my flashlight barely penetrated it. The walls were stone. Old. The kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. Each step down made the temperature rise. Made the air thicker. Harder to breathe. The smell of sulfur grew overwhelming. I tied my shirt over my nose and mouth. It didn't help much. The basement was larger than the church above. Much larger. It stretched out in multiple directions. Corridors carved into bedrock. Support beams holding up the ceiling. This wasn't just a basement. It was part of the mine system. The tunnels that honeycombed beneath the entire town. The tunnels that had been burning since 1962. I found Michael's backpack 30 feet in. Empty except for a journal. The pages were filled with his handwriting. Detailed notes about the fire. About the mines. About something he discovered down here. Something that changed everything he thought he knew about Centralia. According to his notes, the fire wasn't an accident. The official story says it started from burning trash in an old strip mine that ignited a coal seam. But Michael had found evidence. Documents. Testimonies from miners who were there. They'd seen something in the mines months before the fire started. Something that scared them. Made them refuse to go back down. The last entry in his journal was dated 3 days ago. It described a chamber, deep in the tunnels, where the fire burned brightest. Where the heat was so intense that stone melted and reformed into new shapes. Where something lived in that inferno. Something that had been there long before the mines. Long before the town. Something that the coal seam had kept buried and dormant until the fire woke it up. I should have turned back. Should have run from those tunnels and never looked back. But I kept reading, kept following Michael. This path deeper into the earth. The walls around me grew hotter. Started to glow faint red. The stone itself was cooking from the heat below. My skin felt tight, burned. Every breath seared my lungs. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber. The mine, its main shaft. It dropped hundreds of feet into darkness interrupted only by that orange glow. The fire, visible now, a river of burning coal flowing through cracks in the rock. The heat was unbearable. I could feel my clothes starting to smoke, my exposed skin blistering, but it was what I saw in that firelight that made me understand. Made everything click into place. The chamber walls weren't natural. They'd been carved, shaped, covered in symbols that predated any known civilization. The miners hadn't dug into a coal seam. They dug into something else. Something that had been sealed here deliberately. Something ancient and furious and hungry. Michael stood at the edge of the shaft. Not moving, just staring down into that burning abyss. I called to him, screamed his name over the roar of the fire. He didn't respond. Didn't turn. I moved closer, reaching out to grab his shoulder. His skin was cold, ice cold despite the inferno around us. When he finally turned to face me, I saw his eyes. Empty, black, reflecting that orange firelight like mirrors. His mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was older, deeper, multiple voices layered over each other speaking in perfect unison. He told me the truth. The thing that lived in this fire was old, older than humanity. It had been trapped here by people who understood what it was, who knew it needed to be contained. The coal seam wasn't fuel. It was a prison, a barrier keeping something terrible separated from the world above. But the fire broke that prison, weakened it, made it possible for the thing to reach out, to touch minds, to pull people down into these tunnels. Michael had been one of the first, drawn here by dreams, by visions, by a voice that promised answers to questions he didn't he was asking. Now he was part of it, connected, a doorway it could use to see the surface world. The thing wanted out. After centuries of imprisonment, it craved freedom, and the fire was spreading, growing stronger, eating through the coal seam in all directions. Eventually, it would burn through the final barriers, would reach the surface, would be free to do whatever it had been imprisoned to prevent. Michael, its body moved toward me. That terrible voice told me I could join them, become part of the Gestalt, share in the knowledge and power of something that had watched civilizations rise and fall. All I had to do was step closer to the shaft, let the heat consume me, let the fire remake me into something new. I ran, stumbled back through those tunnels. Behind me, I heard footsteps, multiple sets, all moving in perfect sync. The thing wearing my brother and however many others it had claimed. All pursuing, all calling my name in that chorus of voices. The stairs back up seemed endless. The temperature dropped as I climbed, each step taking me further from that burning hell. I burst through the church door into cold October air that felt like a blessing. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. They couldn't follow. Not yet, not while the prison still held. I drove until I hit the highway, until I was surrounded by traffic in towns full of living people. I tried to report what I found, tried to tell authorities about Michael, about the chamber, about what lived in that fire. They listened politely, took notes, then filed it away with all the other crazy stories people tell about Centralia. But I know the truth. That fire is still burning, still spreading. The thing in those tunnels is still there, still pulling people down into the depths. I've tracked missing persons reports from the area. Hikers, explorers, people who went to Centralia and never came back. The numbers are growing. The thing is getting stronger. Michael's journal sits on my desk. The last pages I didn't read in those tunnels. I've gone through them since. Found maps, calculations, estimates of how long until the fire burns through the final barriers. According to his notes, we have maybe 10 years. Maybe less. Nobody believes me. Nobody takes it seriously. They think Centralia is just an interesting abandoned town. A tourist curiosity. They understand that something terrible is waking up beneath their feet. Something that was locked away for good reasons. Something that should never be allowed to escape. I dream about that chamber now. About standing at the edge of that shaft. About that voice offering knowledge and power. Part of me wants to go back. To understand. To see what Michael saw that made him willing to give up everything. But I resist. Because I remember his eyes. That emptiness. That absence of anything I recognized as my brother. Whatever he became down there, it wasn't human anymore. It was something else. Something that served a purpose I couldn't begin to understand. The fire still burns, right now, as you listen to this, under the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, growing stronger, spreading further, weakening the prison that holds something ancient and hostile. And every day, more people go there. More curious visitors, more urban explorers, more potential vessels for the thing that waits in the flames. I am telling you this because someone needs to know, needs to understand that some places should stay abandoned. Some fires should be left to burn. Some doors should never be opened. Centralia isn't empty because of a mining accident. It's empty because something down there drove everyone away, made the ground itself uninhabitable, created a barrier of heat and toxic fumes that keeps people at a distance. But that barrier is failing. The thing is learning, growing smarter, finding new ways to reach out, to call people down into those tunnels, to add them to its collection. And when it finally breaks free, when the fire burns through that last seal, we understand why ancient people worked so hard to lock it away. So here, it's my question for you. If you knew something terrible was trapped beneath a burning town, would you go there? Would curiosity pull you to that place? Or would you stay away and trust that some mysteries are better left buried? Write your answer in the comments, because I need to know if anyone else feels that pull, that whisper in the back of your mind saying to drive to Centralia, to walk those empty streets, to find the church, to descend those stairs, to see for yourself what burns in the darkness below. Story 9, Last Walk. The rope burns were still visible on my wrists when I finally made it out. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. I fix HVAC systems for a living. I have spent 30 years crawling through basements and attics in every corner of Pennsylvania, and I have never seen anything I could not explain with logic and a flashlight. But what happened to me in the old Cambria County Jail in Ebensburg changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It changed me in ways I am still trying to understand. 3 weeks ago, I took a job that should have been simple. The Historical Society had purchased the abandoned jail with plans to turn it into a museum, and they needed someone to assess the heating system before winter set in. The building had been empty for decades, sitting on a hill overlooking the town like a monument to forgotten suffering. Built in the 1800s, it had housed some of the worst criminals in the state. 11 men had been executed there, hanged in the gallows room on the top floor. Their names were still carved into the stone walls, along with dates and final words that no one alive remembered hearing. I arrived on a gray Tuesday morning with my tools and a thermos of coffee. The Historical Society director met me at the front entrance, a nervous woman in her 50s who kept glancing at the upper windows as if she expected to see someone looking down. She handed me the keys and told me she would be back in 4 hours. She did not offer to stay. She did not ask if I needed help. She just got in her car and drove away fast enough to kick up gravel in the parking lot. I should have paid attention to that. I should have asked why she was in such a hurry to leave. But the job paid well, and I needed the money. My daughter was starting college in the spring, and divorce lawyers do not come cheap. I unlocked the heavy iron door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Damp stone and rust and something else underneath. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a warm room. The entrance hall stretched before me, lined with cell doors that hung open on broken hinges. Weak sunlight filtered through barred windows, creating shadows that seemed to move when I was not looking directly at them. I could hear water dripping somewhere deep in the building, a steady rhythm that echoed off the walls. I set down my toolbox and pulled out my inspection sheet. The boiler room was in the basement. The ductwork ran through all 3 floors. I would start at the bottom and work my way up. Simple, routine. I had done this 1,000 times before. The basement stairs descended into absolute darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the black, illuminating stone steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The temperature dropped as I went down, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the cold air. At the bottom, I found myself in a long corridor with rooms branching off on either side. Storage, laundry, the old kitchen, and at the far end, behind a door marked with a faded sign that read, "Boiler," I found what I was looking for. The room was larger than I expected, with a massive furnace squatting in the center like a sleeping beast. Pipes snaked across the ceiling and disappeared into the walls. I got to work, checking connections and making notes. Everything was old but intact. It would need new parts, but the system could be salvaged. I was so focused on my work that I almost missed it. A sound coming from somewhere above me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking across the floor of the room directly overhead. I froze, listening. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopping. Silence. I waited, but they did not resume. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures make noise, but something about the rhythm bothered me. It had sounded too regular, too purposeful, like someone pacing back and forth, thinking. I climbed back up to the main floor and checked every room. Empty, all of them. No sign that anyone had been there. No fresh footprints in the dust. Nothing. I returned to my work, but the unease had settled in my chest like a stone. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere in the shadows, someone was paying very close attention to everything I did. By noon, I had finished the first 2 floors and was ready to tackle the third. The gallows room. I had read about it before coming here. It was the most infamous part of the jail, the place where condemned men had taken their last walk. The room had been preserved exactly as it was during the final execution in 1932. The platform, the lever, the rope, everything except the bodies. I climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, and the temperature dropped again. Not gradually, instantly, like stepping into a freezer. I could see ice crystals forming on the metal railings. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then came back to full brightness. At the top of the stairs, I found a door with a small window set into the wood. Through the glass, I could see the gallows room beyond, and standing on the platform, facing away from me, was a man. I stopped breathing. The figure stood perfectly still, wearing what looked like old prison clothes. Gray shirt, dark pants. His head was bowed, as if he was staring at his feet. I knocked on the door, and the sound echoed through the empty building. The figure did not move, did not turn, did not acknowledge me in any way. I knocked again, harder this time, and called out. Nothing. My hand was shaking as I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a long, low creak, and I stepped into the gallows room. The man was gone. The platform was empty, but the rope was swinging, back and forth, as if someone had just been standing there seconds before. I walked to the platform slowly, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The rope continued its motion, and I reached out to stop it. The moment my fingers touched the rough hemp, I felt it. A jolt of cold so intense it felt like an electric shock. I jerked my hand back, and the rope stopped moving, completely, as if it had never been swinging at all. That was when I heard the screaming, high and desperate and full of terror. It came from somewhere below me, echoing up through the floors. A man, his voice, shouting words I could not understand. Begging, pleading, and then, abruptly, it stopped, cut off mid-breath. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. I ran. I did not think. I did not plan. I just ran for the stairs, my tools forgotten, my only thought to get out of that building as fast as possible. But when I reached the stairwell door, it would not open. The handle turned, but the door itself was stuck. I pulled harder, throwing my weight against it, but it would not budge. Behind me, I heard new sounds. Footsteps, multiple sets, walking up the stairs toward the gallows room. Slow and steady. Getting closer, I spun around and saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows. Men in prison clothes, their faces pale and expressionless. They walked in single file, their eyes fixed on the platform. One by one, they climbed the steps. One by one, they stood beneath the rope. And one by one, they dropped through the floor, their necks snapping with sounds like breaking branches. I watched this happen 11 times. 11 men, 11 executions, playing out in front of me like a film on repeat. The last man to climb the platform turned and looked directly at me before he fell. His eyes were empty, hollow, and in them, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Recognition. As if he knew me. As if he had been waiting for me. The door behind me finally gave way, and I stumbled backward into the stairwell. I fell down half a flight of stairs, landed hard on the second floor landing, and scrambled to my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to run down, to get to the exit, but something made me look up. The figures were standing at the top of the stairs, all 11 of them, watching me with those empty eyes. And then, slowly, they started to descend. I do not remember much about the next few minutes. I know I ran. I know I crashed through doors and stumbled through corridors I had not seen before. The building seemed to change around me, rooms appearing where they had not been, hallways stretching longer than they should. I could hear the footsteps behind me, never hurrying, never stopping. Just walking, relentless, inevitable. I found myself in the basement again, though I had no memory of going down the stairs. The boiler room door stood open, and inside, I could see something glowing. A faint red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. I had nowhere else to go. I stepped inside. The furnace was running. Impossible. There was no power to the building. No fuel, but I could feel the heat radiating from the metal shell, and through the grate, I could see flames dancing. The footsteps stopped outside the door. I turned and saw all 11 figures standing in the doorway, blocking my only exit. They did not move, did not speak. They just stood there, and I understood with terrible clarity what they wanted. This was not their prison. It was mine. They had been waiting for someone to take their place, someone to walk that final walk, someone to stand under that rope and pay for crimes they no longer remembered committing. I was just unlucky enough to be the one who answered the call. I do not know how long I stood there. Time seemed to stop in that room. But eventually, the figures began to fade. Not all at once, one by one, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The last one to disappear was the man who had looked at me from the platform. Before he vanished completely, he raised his hand and pointed. Not at me, behind me, at the furnace. I turned and saw it, carved into the metal. Names, dozens of them, some old and faded, some fresh and clear. I recognized a few, local people who had gone missing over the years. Maintenance workers, security guards, historical society members. All of them had been here. All of them had stood where I was standing. And at the very bottom of the list, I saw my own name, scratched into the metal in letters that looked wet and new. I broke. Something inside me snapped, and I charged the doorway where the figures had been standing. I hit the corridor at full speed and did not stop running until I crashed through the front entrance and fell onto the gravel parking lot. The fresh air hit me like a slap, and I lay there gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The Historical Society director pulled up a few minutes later. She took one look at me and went pale. She asked what happened, but I could not speak, could not form words. She helped me to her car and drove me to the hospital. The doctor said I was in shock, dehydrated, suffering from exposure. They kept me overnight for observation. No one believed my story. No one wanted to hear it. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in that building. And I know something else, something worse. When I finally made it home and checked my tools, I found my flashlight was missing. I must have dropped it in the boiler room. 3 days later, the Historical Society director called. She said they had found my flashlight in the basement. She asked if I wanted her to mail it to me. I told her to throw it away. I did not want anything from that place. She got quiet for a moment, then asked me a question that made my skin crawl. She wanted to know if I had carved my name into the furnace. She said a worker had seen it there and assumed it was some kind of joke. I hung up without answering. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I have tried to convince myself it was a hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Some kind of mental break. But I cannot explain the rope burns on my wrists. I cannot explain how they appeared while I was sleeping. And I cannot explain why I keep waking up at 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps walking through my house. Slow, deliberate, getting closer to my bedroom door. I have thought about moving, leaving Pennsylvania, starting over somewhere far away. But I do not think it matters. I crossed a line in that building. I saw something I was not supposed to see. And now it knows where I am. Now it is waiting for me to take that final walk. Just like all the others whose names are carved into that furnace. So I need to ask you something. If you had the chance to go back, to undo a choice that changed everything, would you take it? Even if it meant facing the thing you fear most? Tell me in the comments, because I think I am running out of time to decide. Story 10. What swims beneath the Monongahela? The body they pulled from the river was an hole. That's what the news didn't tell you. They said drowning, accidental death, a fisherman who fell in during the night. But I was there when they brought him up, and what I saw didn't match any drowning I'd ever heard of. I am a dive recovery specialist. 23 years working with police departments across Pennsylvania, searching rivers and lakes for evidence, vehicles, and bodies. I've seen what water does to human remains. Bloating, decomposition, fish damage. This was different. This looked like something had tried to reshape him, to change him into something else. It started 3 weeks ago. A string of disappearances along the Monongahela River south of Pittsburgh. 5 people in 10 days. All experienced outdoorsmen, fishermen, kayakers, people who knew the water, who respected it, the kind of folks who just fall in and drown. The police assumed a serial killer, someone targeting people near the water, but they couldn't find any connection between the victims. Different ages, different towns, different backgrounds. Nothing linked them except proximity to the river. That's when they called me, asked me to search a section near Charleroi where the last victim was seen. The water there runs deep and dark. Old industrial pollution settled in the sediment. Chemical plants dumped waste into that river for decades before anyone cared about environmental protection. The bottom is a graveyard of barrels and machinery and things that were easier to sink than dispose of properly. I went down at dawn. The water temperature was 40 degrees. Visibility maybe 3 feet on a good day. Down there, it's like swimming through ink. Your dive light shows you a small circle of murky brown water, and everything beyond that circle is absolute darkness. You learn not to think about what might be just outside that light. What might be watching you from the black. I found the first body 20 feet down, tangled in an old shopping cart. Male, mid-40s. He'd been in the water maybe 5 days based on the condition. But when I got closer with my light, I saw the marks. Deep scratches along his arms and chest. Not random, deliberate patterns. And his hands, his fingers had been broken, bent backward at impossible angles, like something had grabbed them and pulled, tried to reshape them into something else, something with webbing between the digits. I surfaced and reported the find, marked the location, waited while they brought in the recovery boat. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from below. That something in that dark water had taken note of me, recognized me as an intruder. They wanted me to go back down, search for the others. The police were convinced this was a dumping ground, that we find all 5 victims in this area. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to pack my gear and leave. But this was my job, my responsibility. So I went down again. The second body was deeper, 35 feet, resting on the silted bottom like it had been placed there carefully. Female, early 30s. She'd been a kayaker, reported missing 6 days ago. The current should have carried her miles downstream, but here she was, positioned deliberately, and the changes were more pronounced. Her skin had taken on a gray-green color that was in decomposition. It was smooth, almost scaled. Her eyes were gone, but the sockets had been stretched, widened, like something had been trying to make them bigger, more suited to darkness and pressure. I reached out to secure a line to her, and she moved. Not dead movement, not gases or current. Her arm lifted, reached toward me. I jerked back, my regulator almost coming out of my mouth. But she didn't pursue, just settled back down, that arm lowering slowly, deliberately, like she was still aware, still partially alive down there in the cold and dark. I surfaced faster than I should have, didn't decompress properly. My ears screamed, my lungs burned, but I needed air, needed light, needed to be away from what I'd seen. The support team pulled me into the boat, asked what was wrong. I tried to explain, Tried to make them understand that something down there was wrong. Impossible. But the words wouldn't come. How do you tell people that the dead aren't quite dead? That something in that river is changing them? They sent another diver down. A younger guy, more experienced with difficult recoveries. I watched from the boat as his bubbles marked his descent. Watched as he reached the bottom. Waited for him to surface. 10 minutes passed. 15. His air supply should have been running low. They radioed him. No response. Just static. And underneath the static, something else. A sound like singing. Like voices underwater calling from far away. His bubbles stopped. The surface went still. They pulled on his safety line. It came up empty. Cut clean through. Not frayed. Not broken. Sliced by something sharp. Something that knew exactly where to cut to separate him from the surface. The police shut down the operation. Called in state resources. Brought in sonar equipment and underwater drones. But the sonar showed nothing. Just irregular bottom contours. Piles of debris. Normal river features. The drones lasted about 20 minutes before their signals cut out. They desynced to the bottom and just stopped functioning. Cameras showing nothing but darkness before going dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those bodies. About the changes I seen. About legends I heard growing up in western Pennsylvania. Stories about Montague, the river creature, half man, half fish. A serpent that lived in the deepest parts of the Monongahela. Old-timers used to talk about it. Said it was seen during the industrial era. Workers at the steel mills would glimpse something massive moving through the water. Something that watched them from below. Something that sometimes took people who got too close to the edge. Most folks dismissed it as folklore, a cautionary tale to keep kids away from dangerous water. But what if it was real? What if something did live down there? Something that had been there long before the mills. Long before European settlers. Something the native peoples knew about and avoided. Something that fed on the pollution. Grew stronger from the chemicals and toxins. Evolved into something worse. I went back the next day. Not officially. The site was closed. But I needed to know. Needed to understand what I'd seen. I went down at dusk. The worst time. Visibility almost zero. But I brought better lights. Stronger equipment. And a camera to document whatever I found. The bodies were gone. Both of them. Moved or taken. But I found where they'd been. The silt showed impressions. Drag marks leading deeper into the river. Following a channel that dropped off into a trench I hadn't known existed. The maps didn't show any deep spots in this area. But here it was. A crack in the river bottom that descended beyond my light's reach. Something moved down there. Large. Serpentine. I caught just a glimpse as it passed through the edge of my light. Scales that reflected green. A body as thick as a telephone pole. And along its length, shapes. Protrusions. Things that looked almost human. Arms and faces pressed into its hide like they'd been absorbed. Made part of something larger. It turned. Started moving toward me. I saw its head. Massive. Eyeless. A mouth that split its skull in half lined with teeth that curved backward. Designed to grab and hold. To pull prey deeper. But behind those teeth was something worse. A throat that glowed faint bioluminescent blue. And in that glow, I saw them. People. Dozens of them. Not dead. Not digested. Just waiting. Suspended in that creature like it was gestating them. Changing them. Making them part of itself. I kicked hard for the surface. The creature followed. I could feel the pressure wave as it moved through the water below me. Feel its size. Its power. My ascent was too fast. Dangerous. But I didn't care. I burst through the surface gasping. Swam for shore with every ounce of strength. Behind me, the water bulged. Something massive rising just beneath the surface. Tracking my movement, I made it to the rocks. Pulled myself out. Looked back at the river. The water had gone still. Smooth as glass. Like nothing had disturbed it. But I knew better. I'd seen what lived down there. What had been taking people. What had been changing them. The missing diver was found 2 days later. Washed up on a bank 10 miles downstream. The autopsy report was sealed. The family was told it was drowning. But I talked to the medical examiner. Someone I'd worked with for years. Someone I trusted. He told me the truth. The diver, his body was changing. His lungs had been restructured. Adapted to extract oxygen from water. His hands and feet showed early webbing. And in his stomach, they found something. An organ that didn't belong. Something that pulsed when they opened him up. Something that kept functioning even after death. The disappearances stopped after that. The police declared the case closed. Assumed the killer had moved on or been scared off by increased patrols. But I know different. The creature is still down there. Still waiting. It's not hunting anymore because it doesn't need to. It has what it needs. Enough people to continue its transformation. Enough genetic material to create something new. I researched the river, its history. Found accounts going back to the 1700s. Native American stories about a water spirit that demanded tribute. Early settler reports of something large in the water. Mill workers who saw things during night shifts. A pattern of disappearances that spikes every few decades. Always in the same area. Always near that deep trench. What if Monangi ISN to one creature? What if it's a cycle? Something that starts small, that feeds and grows, that takes people and transforms them, uses them to reproduce, to create the next generation. The pollution didn't create it. The pollution just accelerated it, gave it more to feed on, made it stronger, faster, hungrier. I don't to dive anymore. To bring myself to enter any body of water deeper than a swimming pool. Because I know what is possible. I've seen what hides beneath the surface. And the worst part is nobody believes me. They think it is trauma, panic, the stress of a dangerous job finally catching up. But I have proof. I have the footage from my camera. It survived when I didn't think it would. Shows everything I saw down there. The creature, the trench, the changed bodies. I've watched it 100 times. Trying to understand, trying to find some explanation that doesn't to involve something ancient and hostile living in a river that millions of people use for recreation and industry. The creature's eyes in that footage. It doesn't have eyes, but I swear it was looking at me, studying me, deciding whether to take me or let me go. And I think it chose to let me go. Not out of mercy, out of purpose, because it wanted someone to know, someone to tell the story, someone to warn people that the Monongahela holds secrets deeper and darker than industrial waste. Last week, I heard about new disappearances. Different part of the river. Near McKeesport, the pattern is starting again. The creature is moving, growing, maybe creating new trenches, new hunting grounds. And nobody is connecting the dots because the incidents are spread out. Separated by weeks, attributed to accidents and misadventure. I tried to warn the authorities. Showed them my footage. They dismissed it, said the video quality was too poor. That what I saw could be debris or large fish. That my imagination filled in details that weren't there. They were not looking for a creature. They were looking for a human killer. And while they search for something conventional, the real predator continues its work. The thing that keeps me awake is thinking about those people inside it. Are they conscious? Do they know what is happening to them? Or is it like a dream? A slow transformation where they gradually lose their humanity and gain something else? Something adapted to darkness and pressure and cold water. I dream about them sometimes. About sinking down into that trench. About being pulled into that glowing throat. About feeling my body change, reshape, adapt. And the terrible thing is, in those dreams, it doesn't feel like dying. It feels like becoming, like evolving into something meant for that environment. Something that belongs down there in ways I never belonged on land. So here is my question for you. If you knew something like Monangi was real, would you still go near the water? Would you still fish or kayak or swim in rivers where the bottom drops away into darkness? Or would you stay on land, always wondering what is lurking just beneath the surface, watching, waiting, slowly building the next generation of whatever it's becoming? Let me know in the comments, because I need to know if I'm the only one who can look at dark water anymore without seeing that glow, without imagining what waits below, patient and hungry and utterly inhuman.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in worlds that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.